here. This is our first stakeholder input meeting that we're having for a possible regional housing measure in as early as 2028. Um, we are super excited to have Heather Peters from BAHFA here to talk about it. She knows the details about what's going on far better than any of us, and she'll give an overview of BAHFA, the measure that we're going through, or the possible measure, the eligible uses, and the revenue mechanisms. We really wanted to get people's input now because there are some decisions that are going to be made in terms of what to analyze for the revenue mechanisms. And so I really wanted to get a broader range of input as we give that input to the BAHFA team. So we're really glad to have people at this short notice. Many of the people on the call were involved in the RM4, which was the regional measure for in 2024 possible bond measure for the region that was pulled off the ballot. But because many of the people that are on this call were involved in that, I've asked Heather to go pretty quickly through that aspect of the presentation so we could spend more time on the revenue measure. That said, I know that we do have some folks that this is new, that you're maybe newer to the housing world or just weren't a part of that. So we'll spend a little bit of time going through that. And I will say there will be plenty of time to reach out and we can talk more in depth afterwards if you have questions on the structure of BAHFA. But we do want to make sure that we cover plenty of time to cover the revenue mechanisms. And we're going to have about 30 minutes of presentation from Heather, then we'll have some Q&A so you can ask some general questions, and then we're going to break out into breakout rooms. And we have some specific questions for everybody to answer in those breakout rooms. And we'll ask every group to have somebody record the information. We'll report back, but we'll keep all the comments that are made in the breakout rooms so that we can be able to review those that we don't have time to go over verbally today. And then we're going to send everybody a survey after the meeting so that we can get input. You have some time to think about it. You might not think of all of your ideas right here on the spot. So we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to send their thoughts in. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to Heather. As I mentioned, Heather is with MTC. She has been involved in the housing world for way longer than I have. I know she's been with BAHFA for a while. So Heather, I know I haven't done any sort of justice to your background, so maybe you can just tell folks a little bit more about yourself. I'm going to show Heather's slides as she's going. So Heather, you can just let me know when you're ready to go, but I'll go ahead and get those shared.
Sure. I'm just grateful you didn't say how long I've been in this business because it's never polite to ask a lady her age. But I've been around for a long, long while. Hello, everyone. My name is Heather Peters. My current title is Principal for Strategic Initiatives here at BAHFA. But prior to that, I had some county level experience at San Mateo County working in their housing department and also in the Schwarzenegger administration and the Brown administration. I was the deputy secretary for business regulation and for housing. So I've been around for a long, long time. And I am so excited to be here. Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, everyone. This is such a great turnout on such short notice. And I want to also congratulate you on being the very first event of this scale that's going on regionally to get input for our Regional Housing Stakeholder Committee, the RHSC. Now, most importantly, I am here to listen to you, and your input will be shared with the RHSC, the full committee, and it will inform the policy framework that will guide BAHFA's next steps. So thank you all for coming. Next slide, please. Okay, now this is just a quick little agenda. Jenny's already given you a preview for my presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about BAHFA and the background for those of you who are new. I'm going to acknowledge some very important lessons that we learned around Regional Measure 4 in 2024. And then we're going to dig really deep on the details of the committee's work right now, including eligible uses for the funding and revenue options. Next slide, please. Okay, so why are we here? The RHSC is creating a policy framework, and it's going to inform two things, both amendments to BAHFA statute, possibly in 2027, and also a potential regional revenue measure in 2028. And I'm going to use a metaphor that you'll hear a lot today and throughout this process called the menu versus the meal. Today, I'm going to use it to help distinguish the distinct phases of this work. And you'll notice that we're here in 2026 talking about what might happen in 2028. Usually, when we're going to the ballot, we all have our hair on fire and we're going very quickly. And this time, one of the lessons learned was to take our time. We are doing that. So in 2026, we are deciding what we want on the menu of things that BAHFA can have the power to do. And these powers are going to be set in the statute, and we're exploring possibly amending it. But just because something's in the statute doesn't mean that we're going to do everything everywhere all at once. So we're going to have to make some choices on which powers to exercise and how to spend that money. And those choices will be made over time. In 2028 or later, we can make the choices to decide what's going to be on the meal that we want to order off that menu. And in this context, the meal is going to be the ballot measures. So all the detail of what specifically we want to eat in 2028 will be a decision made then. Next slide, please. So how did we get here? In 2017 and 2018, there was a diverse group of stakeholders, very similar to the RHSC, and they met to discuss housing challenges across the Bay Area. They produced a document called the CASA Compact that recommended, among other things, that a regional housing finance agency be created. So in 2019, the legislature created BAHFA. And in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, the state gave us some seed money to get started, and we started hiring staff and launching pilot programs. In 2024, most of you know, we had a ballot measure for a bond on the ballot, which unfortunately was withdrawn because it didn't look like we had enough voter sentiment to pass. And we learned a lot of lessons that I'll share with you, but we've regrouped and we're planning our way back on path to the ballot, perhaps as soon as 2028. Now, next slide, please. I'm going to discuss a couple of sections here. The first section is BAHFA background and governing statute. Next slide, please. Now, BAHFA is a creature of statute. That means we can only do what is expressly authorized in our legislation that passed back in 2019. And it's only had minor amendments since. The language was extensively negotiated with stakeholders and with legislatures to simultaneously set broad guardrails and also have built-in flexibility to address local needs and priorities. And we all know that these vary greatly across the region, and they also change over time. So it's really important that we not bake too much in the statute and give ourselves the flexibility to make the choices about the meals as time goes on. The statute specifies what types of revenues can be raised, like bonds or taxes or fees, what the eligible uses of the funds can be, and it sets rules for minimum allocations to funds to have a minimum amount of funds spent on each of the three Ps, production, preservation, and protections. And it also sets distribution rules that limit the amount that BAHFA can retain itself to spend and returns the rest, which is the majority of the funding, back to local governments. Local governments will retain decision-making authority over their funds, and both BAHFA and ABAG must vote together to put a measure on the ballot. It's called the double green light process. Next slide, please. Now, we are a small but very mighty team, and we've made really good use of the funds from the state and generous contributions from philanthropy. So, here are just a few examples of what we've been able to accomplish across the three Ps so far. Our Priority Sites program has supported pre development costs on over 1,300 new affordable homes. Our rental assistance program is supporting 124 seniors at risk of homelessness. And we have supported the preservation of over 1,000 homes, including some that you may recognize in this picture of the Meridian. It's a project in the Canal District, and we want to say thank you to so many of you who worked with us tirelessly to preserve this project. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned we had a disappointment in 2024. That measure was called Regional Measure 4, or RM4 for short, where BAHFA had placed a $20 billion regional housing bond on the ballot in all 9 counties. But it was withdrawn when we just didn't have the votes to win. And we figured it was better to save our money to regroup and fight again another day. Now, we'll discuss a little bit more about this later, but bonds must pass by a two-thirds majority of voters. But in 2024, there was another measure on the ballot. It was known as Prop 5 that sought to lower that threshold to 55%. And the 55% would have applied to BAHFA's bond. Unfortunately, Prop 5 lost by 10% statewide. But in a really bright spot, Marin County's votes was much closer. And the measure only lost by less than 1,000 votes in Marin County. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this slide because these are the very important lessons that we have learned through that process in 2024 and 2025. And there was a lot of soul searching done and a lot of discussion by BAHFA as well as by the separate campaigns. And now I want to really raise a distinction here for you because it's important to recognize that as BAHFA, we are public servants, we are spending public funds, and we are allowed to explore putting a ballot measure on the ballot. And we are allowed to, once something is on the ballot, give neutral information about the facts surrounding the choice that voters made or have to make on anything. But that's where the line stops. As soon as something's on the ballot, BAHFA is not allowed to campaign. Our employees are not allowed to express our personal opinions. And we are not even allowed to to urge people to vote for something that we put on the ballot. Once it goes on the ballot, we are completely neutral. So there was a whole separate campaign apparatus that also did a look back on what happened and what we can learn. Now, there were a lot of strengths. We had strengths in BAHFA and the ABAG partnership. And ABAG, if you're not familiar with the term, it's Association of Bay Area Governments, and it's made up of representatives, elected officials from all 109 jurisdictions throughout the 9 counties in the Bay Area. We provided great technical assistance. We built our regional housing capacity and expertise. And overwhelmingly, there continues to be an appetite to explore a potential 2028 ballot measure. On the other side of the ledger, there were very significant challenges. The dual strategy of regional and statewide measures in the BAHFA bond and the Prop 5 changing of the voter threshold was very difficult. There was an error made by BAHFA in the ballot question. And we corrected that error before the election. So it's not the reason why we took it off the ballot. But we have to acknowledge that that eroded trust and that we have taken extensive measures to ensure that that will never happen again. There is also complexity in both the statute and in how we communicated, all these complicated topics that we're going to talk about in more detail today. And there was a lack of consensus, even once we got to the ballot on some important issues. And most significantly, both the labor community and the business community were not officially supporting the bond. We had not done enough work with them in advance. Economic conditions and voter tax fatigue also played a huge part. Now, I'm not here to say we've resolved everything and we're ready to go. There are significant unresolved policy issues that may necessitate additional legislative amendments that we're going to talk about. And there remains tension between important stakeholders. But at this time, with the RHSC and getting started 2 years in advance, we have much more time and we're setting a much bigger table. Both business and labor are seated at the RHSC table, along with so many others. And we're reaching out early and often to a much wider array of stakeholders, including meetings like this one. And last week, we had a meeting with representatives of over 50 different organizations that had not been previously engaged in the effort. Now, there'll be more meetings like that that folks can attend, and we will be passing on invitations as they get organized. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about the Regional Housing Stakeholder Committee, or HSC. Next slide, please. Now, this is just an illustration of the three different phases that we're going through. You're probably going to get tired of me talking about the menu and the meal, but it is super important that in phase one, where we are right now, we are only engaging stakeholders and getting input and learning and prioritizing and meeting to come up with a policy framework that will inform what happens in phase two if we go to the legislature to add items to the menu, and ultimately what will happen in phase three, which may be as soon as 2028, we get to order a meal and put something on the ballot. Next slide, please. This slide is an illustration of how the Regional Stakeholder Committee is set up. There's a coordinating committee that does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes and supports making the trains run on time. There are three co-chairs, and then there is the regional committee, and there are three subcommittees, and all of those folks in the boxes on the slides have been tasked with caucusing with a much broader stakeholder community. And that's where we are right here today. This sort of meeting fits in there. Next slide, please. I don't expect you to read this. I can't with my eyes, but it's just here. This is a list. We'll give you the slides so you can have this information. This is a list of everyone on the Regional Stakeholder Committee, and they represent over 30 organizations. Next slide, please. Now, much closer to home, I wanted to point out to you that these are folks who you know, Jenny, Omar, Lily, and Aaron from Canal Alliance. You know them well. They are active in the work at the Stakeholder Committee, and please reach out to them frequently. As Jenny mentioned, we don't expect you to know everything in this one presentation, one day, one meeting. Jenny will send out a survey, but these folks are here for you to constantly reach out to if you have any questions or suggestions throughout the process. Next slide, please. Now, these are the guiding principles that the entire process is keeping in mind. They are not in any ranked order, but they include that we're trying to come to a consensus on something that isn't just the greatest, perfectest, most wonderful thing in the world that we all love, but it will involve a bunch of compromises, and it must be passable. We don't want to have our hearts broken again, like when we pulled the ballot measure off in 2024. It also must achieve scale. It must innovate. It must ensure financial stability for BAHFA, advance fairness, deliver on the three Ps, and near and dear to my heart, it must be administrable. It must be something we can actually achieve. Next slide, please. Now, Jenny asked me to speak a little bit about the decision-making process on the RHSC. And right now, the decision-making process is focused on that phase one, that menu, coming up with changes to the menu. And the process that they're applying here for proposed legislative changes is a gradients of agreement model that you may have heard of before, where people vote based on where their feelings are on a number of different issues, from strongly agree to strongly disagree, with neutral in the middle, and these gray areas or light green or orange areas of agree with reservations or disagree but will go along. Now, the RHSC members on that big slide are reaching out to the subcommittees and to all of you and to inform their vote. And all those people on the big slide are going to vote on all the different issues using this gradients of agreement. That will then inform the co-chairs as they're trying to not just simply do the math. This is not a mathematical formula, but they're really keeping in mind all those guiding principles and trying to come up with a winning formula. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to take a drink, and now we're getting into the weeds. I'm going to slow down. So we're going to talk about two different topics here in great detail. One is eligible uses, and the other one is revenue mechanisms. So what can we spend the money on, and what kinds of money can we raise? Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned before, the BAHFA statute tells us what we can do, and there are 4 buckets of funds that we can spend money on. The statute sets minimum spending for each of the 3 Ps, with a minimum of at least 15% for preservation, a minimum of at least 52% for production, and a minimum of at least 5% for protections. And there's a caveat on that bucket, which if you were around during RM4, you know very well that outside of BAHFA statute, the California Constitution provides that if it's a bond measure, separate from taxes or fees or different revenue sources, but only if it's a bond measure, protections are not allowed, not just protections, but anything other than what we call sticks and bricks, actually building and preserving housing. The California Constitution requires that bonds are only allowed to be spent on that. But fortunately, we're going to be talking about a lot of other non-bond options. Finally, the flexible uses bucket is what's ever left after people make their choices on how much above these minimums they want to go at the regional level, and also local expenditure plans. And the flexible uses can be spent on any of the 3 Ps. And BAHFA also has the option to spend up to 10% of its funds on a regional local government grant program. And that's really exciting because the grant program can do a lot of housing supportive uses. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Next slide, please. Okay, first up, preservation. This is the bucket where that wonderful project at Meridian was funded through BAHFA. And there are as I mentioned, buckets of funds that go to BAHFA and buckets of funds that go to the locals. And both of them have to do expenditure plans that set forth exactly how they choose to spend their money. But in both sides, the preservation bucket of money can be spent to convert market rate housing to affordable housing. It can be spent to preserve affordable housing that is coming out of its covenants or restrictions. Sometimes funding, most funding from the state on new affordable housing will have a restriction to have it affordable for a certain amount of years. And then the restriction rolls off. And then what happens? We want to save it from the market. And also rehab of existing affordable housing, whether it has a restriction or not, some of the naturally occurring affordable housing. Now, there's some safeguards built into here. The projects must cap affordability at 120% of AMI, and turnover units must go to low or moderate income tenants. There are also a lot of renter protections that are required, including right of first refusal to return, relocation benefits, and no net loss of units. And both rental and ownership housing can be preserved. Next slide, please. Now, this is the biggest bucket, the production bucket. And this, you see, there's 2 sides to this slide, and that's because this is the bucket that has differences in the statute that we may want to consider adjusting. that there are different rules for BAHFA and different rules for locals. Um, in the first row of the chart, we see that BAHFA can only spend its funds on rental and interim housing, but local funds can do that and can also spend their fund on ownership housing. On the second row, there's a difference in the area median income or the level of affordability. BAHFA can only spend funds up to 80% on its production funds from a ballot measure, 80% of area median income, whereas the locals have a choice to go up to 120%. There's some nuances about deed restrictions that I won't get into, but the statute is a little vague. BAHFA has to have a 55-year restriction, and the term is not explicitly defined for the locals. Finally, the RHNA or RENA that we've heard of, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, the locals must prioritize their low income, very low income, and really put their money towards their RENA goals. There's a tiny little asterisk here that you can't read, and I don't expect you to, but you'll get the slides. And it comes from during RM4, some really great questions were asked. And when we think of production funds, of course, we think about building an apartment building or building single family homes, but it can also it can also fund things like ADUs, adaptive reuse of commercial property, master leased housing serving special needs populations, and investment in affordable inclusionary units. And this is not an exhaustive list, but some interesting things there. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're talking about the tenant protections bucket, and this is the bucket that is for all non-G. It says GO bonds here. If you're not familiar with that term, it means general obligation bonds. General obligation bonds cannot do this, but all of our other fund sources can. We can fund pre-eviction and eviction legal services. We can fund emergency rental assistance. We can fund homelessness prevention services. We can fund relocation assistance above and beyond what state law requires. And we can spend money collecting and tracking data that's so important. Next slide, please. This is the final bucket, and it talks about the flexible uses and that interesting choice that BAHFA can make to do the local government incentive grants. And some of those interesting things that we can fund there are homelessness interventions, homeownership programs where BAHFA couldn't use its production money for that, but it can use its flexible grants. And also infrastructure that supports housing, like transportation, schools, and parks, which are so many of the things that we hear in stakeholders objecting to affordable housing. Now, there's a lot of nuance here, and we're dusting off a lot of legal research, but it's a super broad and flexible statute on the eligible uses. Next slide, please. Now I'm moving into discussing the revenue options. Next slide, please. This is a slide with a lot of definitions of what the revenue options are, and I believe that Jenny is going to give you a handout that includes all of these. You'll get the slides, but you'll also have a handout, so you don't need to memorize this. But a bond, we're all familiar with. It's what goes on the ballot like RM4, and it bonds against future property tax revenue. There's a parcel tax that can be a set charge on a per parcel basis, and we'll talk in a minute about how that might vary, but right now we can only do a set charge on a per parcel basis. There's a head tax, which is a flat fee per employee, a gross receipts tax on business, which taxes their total revenue earned in the Bay Area. There's sales tax, we're all familiar with, and a payroll tax, a little different from a head tax in that it is levied on the payroll. So the more people pay their employees, the higher the tax. And also a possible real estate transfer tax, and that's imposed on the transfer of property. Next slide, please. Now, this is the same revenue mechanisms I just read off to you, but they're coded green and yellow because green are the ones that are in the statute and we can do already: the bond, the uniform parcel tax, a head tax, or a gross receipts tax. The yellow ones, the sales tax, property tax, and real estate transfer tax, we are not allowed to do. They are not in our statute, but we're having conversations about whether maybe they should be. Now, in the column under eligible uses, I already pointed this out that capital costs, those sticks and bricks, are the only things that a bond can fund, but all those other things can fund all the other eligible uses I just talked about. Now there's a question of in the next column, can we include differentiation or exemptions? And this is where there is a ton of deep and important conversations going on about, well, a parcel tax, if you're paying the same tax if you own a studio condo in the East Bay versus a McMansion in San Francisco, that's challenging. So might we want to seek legislative changes to perhaps be able to differentiate that? And some ways that it might be differentiated, for example, would be to exempt seniors or nonprofits. We could also have different rates for different kinds of property, like residential property versus agricultural property. Now, the head tax can also be differentiated. It already does not apply to religious institutions or nonprofit employers, but we might want to explore some other ideas, like perhaps we want to vary the head tax by the business size to exempt small businesses or certain types of owners, like veteran-owned owners. On the gross receipts tax, it can already be variable based on the sector of the business. And we already can provide exemptions for small businesses from the gross receipts tax. And it already does not apply to nonprofits or religious institutions who are employers. But we may want to explore changes like perhaps differentiation of different types of taxes on income. Now, the sales tax is absolutely no go. We can't do that right now, and it would be a big lift to make that change in the legislature. And also, you may be aware that each county has its own cap on sales tax, and there are many sales taxes already. And some of the counties may be at that cap, and we would have to actually go to the state to get permission to raise it. A payroll tax, we need more research on this, but we would also consider any differentiation on payroll tax and real estate transfer tax. We would consider, it's not in the statute, but we could contemplate potential exemptions for differentiation. And I am going to take another sip of water. That was a lot. Now, next slide, please. Okay. Jenny also asked me to share with you what we're calling the scorecard, the factors that are being used by the revenue subcommittee at the RHSC to analyze the revenue mechanisms. And the factors fall into two categories. One on the left is viability, and one on the right is impact. It's important to have both viability and impact. We don't want to have like great support for something that isn't going to be enough to make a dent in anything. And also, we don't want to pursue something that would be a huge impact, but we know it won't pass at the ballot. So under viability, they're considering public opinion and the scale and power of both champions and opposition for each revenue mechanism. And on the impact side, they're looking at scale and durability, how much money is there and how long would it be available? And also, how variable is it? Is it something that could vary if the economy goes up or down, or is it set and fixed? And also what flexibility it offers us. And very importantly, is it equitable? Next slide, please. Now I'm going to remind you again. We're talking about a menu versus a meal. We are talking about most immediately what we want to put on the menu. I've talked a lot about what's already on the menu, and there may be things that are worth opening up the statute and going to Sacramento and all of the uncertainties involved with that. But we may want to do it. And then the ballot measure is the meal. And that's the when we get to the ballot measure, that's when we'll be deciding what we're eating off the menu. Now, I'm not saying we're not going to talk about the meal. It's important to know what you might be in the mood for in 2028 to make sure that it's on the menu right now or in 2027. But please, as we talk, keep that distinction aside because there are things that very high level powers you put in a statute, and many, many, many more details are decided at a later date. And with that, I am done talking and we'll start listening and answering questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Heather. That provides a great overview. We wanted to take a few minutes for some Q&A before we break out into the breakout rooms so that folks have feel like they have a solid understanding of the facts before we start talking. So I'm just going to open it up, and if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand. And Joanne, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to go ahead?
Do. Thank you so much, Heather. Thank you so much for breaking it down into digestible pieces. That was a great presentation. I really appreciate it because it was a lot. Couple questions. One is, does the passage of the statewide housing bond impact regional measures in 2028? Have you thought about that? The second one was,
Can I take one at a time?
yep,
And I'm going to ask everyone. I don't have a great memory to
okay,
track multiple questions at a time. But first one, great question. The state ballot there is a state bond on the ballot right now. We're going to be voting on it in 2026. That is unrelated. Whether it passes or fails does not affect our ability to also put a regional measure on in 2028 or whenever. Next question.
great. Yeah, and I wasn't I was more about have you and your colleagues thought about the passage or the failure of that and how that impacts moving forward in 2028 in terms of voter, kind of appetite is more of what.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a great
Okay,
question. Not only are we tracking voter appetite on that, we're tracking voter appetite on a lot of other things that have happened in the past, as well as what's going to happen with the regional transit measure that's on
right.
in 2028. What's going to happen with local bonds and taxes for a number of things. We're tracking, of course, we're in that mix is the success of the SMART tax exemption. So we are looking deeply. We have an opinion research firm on retainer.
Awesome. And my other question was, so RM4 was a general obligation bond. So why are you exploring other revenue mechanisms for for the future election cycle? What lessons did you learn that would give you interest in exploring other revenue mechanisms?
Yeah, that's a great question too. We want as many tools in the toolbox as feel appropriate. The bond is one tool in the toolbox. There are all those others, the taxes that we can already do that are in there. And there may be other ones that we may want to add. And it's to give us ultimate flexibility to find the right tool for the right time for the right task. In RM4, it was a bond, and I didn't get to that last column in the slide, but I can just give it to you that there are different voter thresholds for different measures. On the bond, it was a two-thirds measure. It is by constitution two-thirds. There was an effort to try and lower that. It didn't work. There is currently on the ballot in November Prop 43, which is commonly known as the Howard Jarvis measure. That would take a step in the exact opposite direction We will be voting in November on whether we want to, we meaning everyone in California, not just us here, whether they want to actually raise the voter threshold to two-thirds for all those other things too, even if it's a citizens initiative.
Right. Yeah.
And I should mention the Citizens Initiative. I didn't have a slide on that, but under BAHFA's current statute, BAHFA must vote to put something on the ballot, and there is no right for citizens to organize and put something on the ballot for BAHFA. That may be something we choose to add in the 2027 amendments if we go there. And currently, that would be a voter threshold of 50 plus one for everything other than the bond. So we may choose that because it's easier to get it across the finish line, depending on how the Jarvis measure turns out.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Other
Right.
questions?
Well, we did have that question about Prop 43 and how it impacted things come in the chat. So I think we've hit that now. And I know Heather can't advocate, but I can say we are really hoping that it doesn't pass. And we are not going to support that measure. Um, we have another question in the chat that says, in some parts of the county, preservation is much more viable than production. And is there any chance that the percentage allocated to preservation could be increased?
Um, Under current law, the minimum of preservation is 15%. So that's a minimum. Now, as I mentioned, most of the funds will go back to the county, and the county will make they call it an expenditure plan, and there will be a lot of outreach and discussion and choices made there, and so it's completely within the discretion of the local government to the county. And there's another nuance, but let me finish this thought. To choose what level above 15% for preservation that it wants to do in its expenditure plan. Same for production, same for protections if it's not a bond. You can always go above that, you just can't go below. And the one other nuance I want to raise is that the funds go to by statute. Um, in a ballot measure, it would be decided how much goes to BAHFA versus to the local governments. The statute right now says that BAHFA can get no more than 20%. It could actually be decided to be less than. And also, the statute provides that of the money that goes back to the local governments, there are only certain entities that receive that money. There are there's BAHFA. I mean, BAHFA gets its own. Then there's the counties. There are the three big cities: San Francisco, Santa Clara, and San Jose. I mean, I'm sorry. San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland are the big three. And then also there's a very complicated but important formula that acknowledges that some of the smaller cities bear an out of balance percentage of responsibility for the low income RENA in a county. And so it does a calculation that I won't bore you with that says that if you are a smaller city that does have a high percentage of the county's low income RENA, you can get a local distribution. In RM4, that math worked out to be the city of Napa and the city of Santa Rosa.
All
Did I
right.
answer that question?
Are there any other questions right now? We, uh, I don't see any hands, so unless
I,
somebody has something pressing, I think this would be a good point to turn it over to the breakout groups.
so
And
Jenny,
with,
could I
oh,
ask a question?
sure.
I was curious if you could articulate what the position of, say, the average voter would be that would oppose this passing.
Oh, there's so many. As I mentioned, we've looked at voter sentiment in many, many different regards. There are many folks that are just absolutely opposed to any new taxes or any new bonds or anything, that would come out of their pockets. There are business interests that are opposed to raising business taxes. There are real estate interests that are opposed to raising real estate taxes. Um, and there is an increasing voter sentiment that they don't trust government with the money. So those are some broad strokes.
Huh? Joanne?
Sorry, I have one more, Heather.
Sure.
So sort of piggybacking on what Noah said, um, the currently the statute does not allow sales tax, payroll tax, and I can't remember the third one. What is the how difficult is the process to change that legislative statute? Is there an appetite currently in the legislature to do that? So before any groups go down a path about, hanging on to that, what's the reality that that actually can happen?
Great question. And there are a number of sort of gates that we need to get through. Gate number one is we all informally need to come up with this policy framework and feel like we, the stakeholders, including BAHFA, feel like there's a there. Then it needs to go to BAHFA's and ABAG's boards, because if there were to be a bill, we would be sponsoring it. So the stakeholder community writ large and staff can all agree on something, and then we take it to our boards, and they also must say, yes, this is something we would agree to put into a bill and advocate for. That decision will happen at the end of this year, December and January is when they vote on whether they're going to have a bill or not, and broad strokes of what's in it. Not bill language, not details, but they will authorize our legislative, we call them lobbyists. Lobbyists is the name left my brain. Our lobbyists, to broadly negotiate on perhaps adding XYZ to the statute, but not like the details, not the nitty gritty. And then we also must find a bill author and make sure that the legislature is with us there. And we are already engaged in that. We have already met with the entire Bay Area caucus, briefed them on everything that's going on. They are eagerly awaiting to hear. Of course, the Bay Area caucus is quite diverse and have different views and would have different opinions on bills. And once you go to legislature, like, they don't have to do what we suggest. And they'll have lots of people in their ears who weren't a part of this necessarily. But yeah, they're eager to hear from us and from the boards of what they think. And then the ultimate decider is the voters.
Great, thank you. It was very helpful.
Yeah, it also is another illustration of how well we learned the lesson that we did not start early enough and we did not engage a broad enough cross section of folks in RM4. And we are pounding the pavement early.
Great.
Yeah.
And with that, Claire, I saw you had your hand up. Oh,
Yeah, I have a question. I sort of have the cart and the horse going around in my mind. You do all the research and you talk to people and so forth and so on, and presumably you come up with a number. We want $20 billion, And so I wonder how you sort of, get the horses in a group so you come up with a reasonable number, right? That you think is passable.
Mhm.
I'm just curious how you go about doing the math.
Yeah, great question. And fortunately, that is not my job. Math is not my favorite. But we have brilliant people and consultants on the case. And there are subcommittees for both the eligible uses and the revenue mechanisms. The subcommittee on the revenue mechanisms has already done a landscape analysis of all tons of research that was done on the transit measure currently and many other measures where consultants and experts and economists they've looked at all the numbers, and if you do this parcel and this percent and blah, 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 how much does it produce? So they're doing the math on what each revenue source could produce. And then there's a conversation of the what number we're going for is there's infinite need. So
Right, that's my point.
there's no point in defining whether it's 20 billion or 100 billion if we, know that it's infinite need. But what they'll be looking at in that analysis is, okay, if this could produce X dollars, they'll run that through. What could that do? What could that produce? And is it worth it? And also, can it pass? So it is a little bit of the cart before the horse.
Yeah, the reason I ask is, I live in Belvedere, and we had a measure for a transfer tax,
Mm,
and it went down in flames.
yep.
Way down in flames. And maybe it's because it was Belvedere. I don't know. But theoretically, a lot of people thought it was a good idea, rather painless, but didn't fly.
Yeah,
Oh,
transfer tax is one of those when they do that analysis, as I had on the scorecard, they look at champions
Yeah,
and opponents.
right,
Transfer tax is something that the realtors and business will vehemently oppose.
right.
So it's tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
all right.
But we're in the early stages. We haven't taken anything off the table yet. We're just looking.
Yeah, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for people to talk and give their input. So I'm going to hand it over to Lizzie now and have her introduce what we're going to do in the breakout rooms. And then we're going to split everybody up and we'll come back together again. So Lizzie, take it from here.
Great. Okay. So we're going to divide up, do 4 groups of 7 to 8 people each sound manageable for the conversation? Okay. We're going to have 4 breakout groups. We will ask you to discuss 5 questions. So I want to make sure you're keeping an eye a little bit on the time, and we can also do some reminders to make sure you're getting through all of them. We would like you to document the salient points that come out of your conversation. It doesn't have to be consensus, but just things that come up that are things you think it would be useful for BAHFA to know. Keep all of that. Appoint someone in your group as a note taker. Document all of that. I'm going to send you a link shortly to where you should be making note of that, and it has the questions in the doc. But when it comes time to share out, we'll just ask you to share your top 3 main points that you'd like the group to hear now. We'll have a record of everything, so all of this feedback will get back to BAHFA, but we only have time really to have each group share a couple things from their conversation. So I will share now the link in the chat. So this Google Doc has, sorry, I just shared the agenda. Let me try that again. Okay. This should be to the Google Doc with the notes. Let me know if that does not work for anyone. The first page of it is a revenue mechanism overview. So that's a reference point for you all. You can use the tabs on the left-hand side of the Google Doc to navigate back and forth. Revenue mechanism is for everyone to look at. And then you'll be assigned into a group with a number. Use the notes tab for your group's number to document your group's conversation. So I made a whole bunch of groups. We won't use all of them, but so we should have 4 groups. So make sure you're taking notes in your numbered group. I see a question from Sandra. Go ahead. Oh, no, false hand. Okay. All right. So I sent the notes page. There are 5 of us who are co-hosts. We actually do have enough people to assign a co-host to each one. So I'm going to include us in the random assortment into the breakout groups, and I'm going to start those now. So stay tuned. You'll be automatically moved somewhere into a group.
Lizzie, how long would you like us to meet for?
Great question. We have until 5. So we were going to do this until 4:40. We'll see where we are at 4:40 and then
Yeah, why don't we go
what do
ahead
you
and go
think,
to
Jenny?
4:45?
4:45?
Just, yeah.
Okay. We'll go to 4:45 and then reconvene and ask for some highlights from each group. Okay. I'm going to open all the rooms. Here we go.
All right.
Did it just get put us in a room with each other?
No.
Wait.
Can you see the rooms? You can probably, oh, here's the breakout rooms.
Oh, maybe it's giving
We're
me a choice
unassigned.
to group. Okay. So it's giving us the choice. So, can you
I
see
can
them?
assign you. I'll assign you to room 2,
Okay.
and then I can
Did it put us back in our group? Or were we the only ones? Wait a minute. Oh, did I only end our group? Hang on. Jenny, did I only end my own group? Or no? Okay. People are trickling in.
Yeah, I got a message from you, but it was giving another minute. So some of the groups, I was looking at the tabs and people were
Got
busy writing away. So
it.
might have taken a little bit to
Yeah, we did not get through all of the questions. We touched on, I think, all the topics, but a lot to discuss.
yeah, and it was a lot of information in a short amount of time. And so I did assure everybody in our group we're going to send out the slides and we're going to send out a separate survey. So if you didn't get it all in now, or if you have thoughts later, or you need to, mull it over some, this isn't your last chance.
Okay, so we're going to very quickly, we have 9 more minutes. Share out from our groups. We can go in order. Just the top points your group would like to share with the group here. As Jenny said, everything's documented, so don't worry about getting it all in, but just anything you'd like the group to hear. That's interesting to know. So group one, if someone could go ahead, please.
I'll speak for group one. Um, we had a great discussion, and the top 3 points are that wherever we go with the revenue mechanism, it needs to be synthesized into an elevator pitch. So the exemptions should be simplified if there are them, and it should just be clear to anyone. Um, there should also be a balance of equity and ability to generate funds. So if we have exemptions, making sure that we're still available to generate funds, and then a balance between regional goals and local flexibility. And finally, one of our group members was saying that people are getting warmer on signing off on tax measures based on the SMART train and that there's positive momentum in Marin County. So I like the positive thinking there. But yeah, that was our group.
Great, thanks.
Okay, Annie's going to share from group two.
Okay, so I think that equity versus regressivity is a tension that came up frequently. Parcel sales tax raising regressivity concerns. Overall, historically, current mechanisms skewing towards homeowners versus renters, leaving equity building gaps for lower income members of our community. Second point would be political viability, favoring sales tax, perhaps, or parcel tax or bonds. Partial tax have a track record of local defeat, whereas sales tax have more recent success. And the bonds two-third threshold, I think, made them the least favorite option, but there might have been some ongoing discussion, so I'm not sure if I can actually claim that statement. Marin's funding is tied to what Marin generates. It's not a fixed allocation. So we just discussed the importance and the fact that it raises the stakes on which mechanisms are chosen locally, so that we can make sure that we're setting ourselves up for the maximum benefit for the community.
Thank you. Okay, group three.
Ditto a lot of what's already been mentioned. A few things that came up for us on exemptions, which we definitely thought either an earning or income exemption. Some conversation about an age exemption and acknowledging in counties like Marin that excludes a lot of the base. So again, kind of re-emphasizing income and earning as the space there. We had the benefit of learning from Elaine Johnson from Santa Cruz, Housing Santa Cruz County, who recently passed Measure C through their tireless work, and many lessons from that campaign and signature gathering. The biggest one is building your base. So treat people with respect, feed them well, take care of your volunteers in the process, and establish relationships and trust with folks. It's the biggest investment and most important one we can make. And final on the next step is how do we make this investment, if it continues lift many boats, right? Like, so how are we talking about transportation and parking at the same time, or energy portfolios? So how do we use this one moment of needing housing to be improved to co-benefits or multi-solutions, as I know Omar likes to say, in the needed shifts we need across the state and region? Thanks.
Great, thank you. And group 4.
That's me, Lizzie. Thank you so much. Okay, so our big takeaways were we don't see a path to success for a head tax, gross receipts tax, or a payroll tax. Businesses are leaving the Bay Area, and so we thought that there would be too much opposition here. Same thing with the real estate transfer tax. We're reading about that locally here in San Rafael already. Really, really difficult to get anything passed by 2/3 vote, though we did have some success at the June primary, but we really felt like we should concentrate on a citizens-led initiative. We liked the idea that in the parcel tax that there could be variations to that tax. There could be exemptions and some flexibility there. Not just, it could be the parcel, it could be the actual building. It could be a flat fee. There's many different ways to go about that. We thought maybe, a mansion tax was placed in New York City. Is that something that we could look at in the Bay Area? Who knows? But basically, we came down to what are the three things: is we need a path to yes, we need something that will have the most impact, not to fret about it being the silver bullet, that we're not going to be able to pass something that is going to solve our problems. Let's just pass something or let's put something on the ballot that we feel confident we can pass, and then we'll have some impact, go back to the voters at another time and say, this is what we did, and we'd like to ask you again to renew it and maybe even expand it.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who synthesized their group's conversations. We have all of the notes in the Google Doc. So like Jenny mentioned, we'll be sharing the video of this meeting with all of you. And we have a survey we'd like you to fill out. So if there's anything you forgot to mention, or you'd like to just kind of summarize or reiterate your points, I will put that link in the chat right now. And I will also send it via email and probably spam your inboxes with it several times. So don't worry about saving that link now, but if it's on your mind and you have some time, go ahead and start filling it out. We really appreciate you all participating today, and the discussion was really rich. We're going to have another of these feedback sessions in early September, date TBD. We'll iron that down soon. And you can reach out to us. I'll